the last time you were wrong? Really? Publicly wrong? This is not a rhetorical question. I want you to think about it and think about how you felt in that moment. Maybe you were awash in embarrassment, looking for the nearest hole to hide in. Or maybe you were a little defensive, even a little angry at the people who watched you be wrong. Or maybe you were completely frozen, not sure what to do next. There are many different ways to respond to being wrong, but usually our reaction is some negative emotion. Most of us learned early on in our life that it is better to be right than wrong, that to be right is to be smart, and so we avoid being wrong as much as we possibly can. That was certainly the case for me. I grew up as what could lovingly be referred to as a bit of a perfectionist know-it-all. It was very popular in middle school, as you can imagine. My coworkers might tell you there's a little vestige of that still remaining in my persona. I really liked to be right. And there are actual physical reasons why we enjoy being right. We get a little dose of happy in our brain when we come to closure and when we feel certain. But that feeling rests on an illusion. Because the thing is, I am wrong all the time, and so are you. How do I know that? Well, it actually goes back to how our brains work. My earliest conception of the brain was it was some mix of a computer and a high-def video recorder, right? It records everything that's going on around you, and you file those files away in your personal video storage facility somewhere back here in your brain. And when you need to recall it, you pull it out and you play it back in perfect HD. That's how I thought the brain worked. Well, it turns out the brain works more like an impressionistic painter. It captures the essence of what's happening, but not the whole thing. Our world is wonderfully, miraculously complex. So complex that our minds do a favor for us that we are completely unaware of. They filter out a whole bunch of that complexity. And they do it in systematically biased ways. We pay attention to the things that matter to us, that we care about, that fit with our current understanding of the world, and we ignore all the things that don't. You already have a model of me based on what you see, what you've heard in the last 3 minutes, your impression of what a business school professor might be, or maybe I remind you of a favorite cousin or a hated boss, and how you felt about that person informs your model of me right now. And that model is at least a little bit wrong. Or you can perform the following experiment when you go home tonight. Go into a room you know really well and close your eyes and think about that room. Bring it to mind in as much detail as you possibly can. And then open your eyes and have a look around. Your natural instinct is going to be to ask, what did I get right? But ask a different question. What did I miss? Now, in some cases, it'll be something quite small, a mark on the wall or a picture that's a little askew. But in other cases, there will be huge gaps in your model of that room, and that is just fine. Your model of the world is exactly as sophisticated as you need it to be to get through the day. We are constantly building models of the world, and we do so for a very good reason. If we didn't, we would be overwhelmed with complexity. Our models of the world are what let us take action, and so from an evolutionary perspective, they are essential to us. The problem is, we're not aware we're doing it. It doesn't feel like we're modeling the world. I just live in it. I have access to the reality around me. So it shuts us off from learning anything new. it makes us incredibly uncomfortable with the idea of being wrong. And that is amplified by the fact that there are all of these other people in the world. And just as you are going through the world, simplifying it and building models on the basis of your own biases and incentives and experiences, so are they. But they have different biases and incentives and experiences, and so it's quite natural for them to build a radically different model of the world than you hold. Have you ever gone to a meeting at work? Your boss lays out the plan, and for once is perfectly clear. You know exactly what you need to do on the basis of what you heard. And you turn to your colleague and you say, "That's great. I know exactly what to do." And she says yes, and then she tells you what she's going to do on the basis of the meeting. And you think to yourself, "My God, what meeting was she in?" Because it was so radically at odds with what you heard and with what you expected. It happens all the time. The challenge emerges in how we react to that different model. Very rarely do I think to ourselves, "Well, that's interesting. She must see something I don't see." No, we think to ourselves, "She's wrong." And we know what to do when someone is wrong. Explain the right answer. And if they don't get it right away, explain it again, slower and louder, until eventually one of us says, "Fine, we'll do it your way." Notice I said, "Fine, we'll do it your way," not "Thank you, you're right." Because if you've ever had to be the person who gave in because the other person really liked arguing or was your boss or was married to you, whatever reason you had for saying it, you know it leaves some emotional residue. It is an uncomfortable feeling to believe you're right and to do something else. And the emotional residue is amplified by the way we often act in the face of someone who is wrong. Typically, we reduce them to one of two things. So there's one explanation for why you and I could have all the same information, and one of us comes to the right answer and one of us comes to the wrong answer. One reason for that is that one of us just isn't quite as smart as the other one. Have you ever had someone explain the right answer to you as if you're truly stupid? How do you feel about that person at the end of the conversation? Of course, that's not the only possible explanation for why a person could be wrong. They might, in fact, be incredibly smart enough to know the right answer, and yet they're willfully, consciously arguing for the wrong answer. So there must be some reason, some hidden agenda, right? Some reason why they are making an argument for the wrong answer, and so now they're not stupid, they're evil, right? What happens in business is organizationally is we tend to cast entire departments as one of stupid or evil. Typically, the finance guys, "Sorry, you're the evil ones," right? Because you just won't let us spend money on the stuff that matters. It is a pretty short walk from stupid and evil to entrenchment and even hatred, especially if the person you're arguing with is miles away behind a computer screen. When we cast other people as one of stupid or evil on the basis of our belief that we are right and they are wrong, it has really bad results. And that can be true even when it feels like the answer is definitively the right answer. A few years ago, I was asked to teach in a program for executives working in healthcare. And I teach at a business school. So up to that point, I had only ever worked with business executives. And all of my examples are from the world of business. And I had a hunch that the physicians and nurses and allied health professionals were not going to be super keen to hear about my business examples. And so I sought advice from people who might have engaged with groups like this before, who have been members of this group. And one of my good friends, a psychiatrist and an educator, gave me some great advice about absolutely every example needs to be a healthcare example. And so why don't you come in and talk about something really topical, kind of controversial, and see what happens? And so I said, oh, great, what should I do? And she gave me a great example. I went ahead, I went into that room, about 50 healthcare leaders, and I happily and confidently told them that we were about to talk about the vaccine debate. There was a little hush that fell over the room just for a moment as I felt waves of hatred coming at me. And then a booming voice from the very back of the room, I can still hear quite vividly, and that booming voice said to me, "Excuse me, but there is no debate about vaccines." Maybe I was wrong in my choice of example in that particular moment, but a really interesting thing happened. Another voice from another part of the room popped up, and she said, "Well, isn't there though? Not from a scientific point of view. We know 20 years ago there was a single journal article published that posited a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. That is the most thoroughly repudiated piece of medical writing ever. The person who wrote it had his medical license taken away. And the medical community has for 20 years said to anyone who does not want to vaccinate their children at the time and on the schedule that the medical community recommends, that they are both stupid and evil." And how is that working for us? Every year, fewer people vaccinate than the year before. We have had outbreaks of diseases we thought were eradicated. People are dying from measles, and that should not happen. So what we ended up talking about in that room was whether seeking to understand the perspective of a parent who believes it should be her responsibility to make that choice for her child, whether understanding that just a little more deeply could at least change how we talk to her. Because we have the right answer and we're getting the wrong result. We need to get more comfortable being wrong. We need to stop framing wrong people as one of stupid or evil and say instead they are human. Being wrong is human. It is how we are wired. And so I want to encourage you to think about how you can get more comfortable inhabiting that wrongness. And so there are two things I believe that we can do to get a little more comfortable. The first is to spend a little more time thinking about our own thinking. Not in the sense of reflecting on our thinking the way we normally do. Normally, when we believe something, we look for evidence to support it. Confirmation bias, the most famous of our cognitive biases, exists and is extraordinarily powerful. And here is how it works. I'm going to give you an example that my husband loves me to give because it is an example about him. So when we were first married, he had a deeply held belief about the world. His belief, not mine. And that deeply held belief that he had was that all people who drive Audis are jerks. How do I know that this was his deeply held belief? Because whenever we were in the car, if an Audi driver did anything remotely objectionable, he would point it out to me. And if an Audi driver did something generous and kind, like let him in, nothing. Or if, heaven forbid, a BMW driver did something obnoxious, again, nothing. Our confirmation bias is sticky. It is how we think about the world. It informs what we believe and why we believe it. And so the thing we need to do is start to look for disconfirming evidence. Believe what you believe, but ask yourself, how might I notice what does not fit? How might I see things that are not in the pattern of what I already believe? So starting with thinking more about our thinking. The second thing, very closely tied to that, is to start to see what you do not see. And the best way to do that is to spend time with people who see the world differently. To seek to understand other people's points of view as an interesting opportunity to learn, especially when that person says things that feel wrong. Our natural reaction, again, in that moment is to argue. The fight or flight reaction, our amygdala fires. We want to argue. Take a breath, pause, and consider without evaluating. Just consider. And if your amygdala fires and you're ready to fight, give yourself a little bit of time by just leaning back and saying, say more. The magic words. It buys you all kinds of time to just listen. These two things, being more intentional about understanding our own thinking and where it comes from, and being more open to understanding the perspectives of others, are a step along the journey to greater comfort being wrong. And the change doesn't have to be huge. I'm deeply inspired on this front by a young man that I met a few years ago through a program at a school called John Palani Collegiate, which is about 30 minutes north of here. And this young man was named Jibril. He was finishing his high school years, and he took a course that really was aimed at helping these students be more comfortable being wrong, be more open to other perspectives, and to see possibilities to create something new. And at the end of that course, we asked him what had changed for him. Had he seen any change in himself? What was that? And he told an interesting story. He said before he took this course, before he was aware of how his mind worked in the world, he was one of those guys who once he came to an answer, he was done, right? He didn't want to hear anything else, and even if evidence emerged a little bit later that maybe he was wrong, he did not want to hear it because he'd already finished. And he said even on tests, you know how your teacher would tell you to read over your test? He did not want to do that because he just wanted it to be done. And so he said the greatest change he had seen in himself was that he used to write all of his tests in pen, and now he writes them in pencil. Now that is a tiny change, but it signifies something amazing. Because the answers that used to be finished can now keep getting better and better. So that really is my challenge to you, is to think about those moments when you write someone else's story in pen and ask, what would happen if I changed that to pencil? If I was just a little more open to being wrong about that person or that idea? I believe that is the first step to changing a lot of the division and anger and hatred we see in the world today. But of course, I could be wrong. Thank you.